policy review mechanism where our staff are experts at checking what's happening and mapping issues. So we'll do that together. And this is how an exceptional beginning of collaboration with other organizations and with, oops, no, sorry, I'll get it, was started. Very simply, everybody's hyper clever here with IT matters. So it was a simple page that was put on the website of the WTO. It did not require a formal notification. Just give us a call. The staff will help you describe the restrictions. And there were many of them put there, and it could help countries planify, oh, it's blocked there, so I'll change my supply chain and collect things or request things from another place. Why did it take place in the WTO? Because WTO has an expertise in those issues, that is border restrictions. Then came DG Ngozi, an outstanding woman who knew about vaccine and who started saying, vaccine policy is trade policy, and there's no trade unless we deal with this vaccine issue. And she, and you will see the next slide, started working directly with manufacturers, producers, distributors of vaccines to help the world. She even said, until the last African is vaccinated, every Europeans and Americans are under threat. So it's not a rich-poor issue, it's really a global issue. This was a very unique request, if you see, from Canada and others, asking the DG personally to convene discussions with manufacturers about medical products also, but you will see about, as it's mentioned in the bottom, how to improve those value chain, where to invest, questions that are not traditional trade questions. In WTO, traditionally we deal with tariff, subsidy, export restriction, a few things, but nothing like that. But then the governments, a handful, ask her to do it, and she will. She will set up also what is called a war, what we used to call the war room, like Churchill did, and task force with the big players in the field, because, again, she was of the view that the issue required sort of global reaction, and access to vaccine meant complete and improved coordination. I put this thing because very often during the COVID, we saw on the news, so many vaccines are produced there, and we're short of this. Well, this was done, funny enough, at the WTO, not in any other place, because of its statistical sort of expertise on border actions. And this is an old statistics, and the problem got resolved. But remember, my presentation is about new roles that international organizations offer to the governments and will succeed in helping. Another example was this new approach with supply chain, which is a term now we use all the time, but we never did before. The business people did, but not government. But in the context of vaccine, there was a need to coordinate and collaborate, and COVAX was created, but WTO was a very strong actor in contributing to finding where to put the vaccine, where to send them here and there, with advice, of course, always of the private sector. And this brought further work. The IMF and the World Bank were asked by government, we need now to deal with supply chain in all areas because we were missing bits for cars, bits of food. Where to deal with that? There's no organization responsible for supply chain, so they said, ask the WTO. They are used to goods going from country A to country B to country C. Anything that is trans-border is trade. And you will see my message will be, especially now with digital trade, everything crosses border, so everything is labeled trade and is indirectly or directly brought to the WTO. So global, different sort of activities on supply chain and reports, things that were not done sort of 5 years ago. This even led in the ministerial declaration, so that's the public declaration that all governments make together when they meet every 2 years. So now you have a sort of explicit reference to supply chain as in the mandate of the work of the WTO. Sorry. Same thing with critical minerals, because soon working on those supply chain, the experts realized, oh wow, in supply chain we have a direct link with digital, and digital has a direct link with critical mineral. There had already been disputes because China very wisely saw early on its power over critical mineral and that started putting export restrictions, blocking what it had to go in the West. There were disputes. I was legal officer on 2 of those disputes. But we realized, the experts realized, that there was a need to deal with that. There were also other things that grabbed the WTO mandate. Women. Maybe because of Ngozi. Maybe because she has this special weakness for women. But it's also that we don't realize how football is trade related. So not only the clothes, the balloon, but the price you pay for tickets. The television is also WTO services. So there's millions and millions of dollars. And then this was in parallel to COVID and all that, an idea, oh, if we have the support of these people, maybe it will help improve sort of the knowledge about trade. A new role that was fundamental was the sort of reconciliation. As you know, vaccine involves inventions, which means patent. And early on, South Africa and India said, we want to be able to copy all the vaccines made by Western countries or other countries. You can imagine Europeans, UK, Switzerland jumping, saying no. The DG, it's not envisaged anywhere, said, okay, I'm going to mediate this dispute. So she called the trade ambassadors and ministers of those 4 countries, EU, US, South Africa, India, and she said, I think it's 2 weeks, but don't quote me like that, every 2 weeks on Tuesday afternoon, we knew it was Tuesday afternoon, we meet and we see how you move on trying to find a solution to that. Isn't it possible to allow developing countries to copy vaccine, but just for a while, making sure it really goes to the sick people and not re-exported to Europe for money? She conducted that with the DDG of the time, Annabelle, and they also invented what will become important. Many of you have a class in public international law now. In WTO, there's a rule that says, if you're a member, you are bound by all provisions of the WTO. There's no reservation. It's everything bound everyone. But what did they do? They invented, or did not invent, it existed, but they introduced for the first time in WTO the concept of opt-out, and you will see how it was put. That is, there was a decision adopted at the ministerial authorizing the use of vaccine without consent, copying medicine. But there was this famous footnote, very first footnote, very important, where it says an eligible member. Who's an eligible member? It's a developing country. You know, China says it's a developing country. What was said here is that for the purpose of this decision, developing countries with existing capacity are encouraged to make a binding commitment not to copy. China did this commitment, US agreed, it went ahead. And now it's being used more and more for vaccine. Other things that change enormously. It's the NC12 ministerial. In the preamble of the WTO, I'm sorry, I thought I had put the preamble there. The preamble of the WTO, dating back to 93, says word for word, the goal of the WTO is to improve trade in line and with the goal of respecting sustainable development. This was never really there was no big trumpet about that, but it's this clearly written in the preamble. And this has allowed the WTO to grab a long list of new additional mandates. But in this ministerial of 22, you have in the first paragraph the traditional rule of trade, but interestingly, importantly, not only alleviation of poverty, but sustainable development and the preservation of environment. Also very important for the first time, collaboration with international organizations and relevant stakeholders. That's the private sector, the vaccine producers, stakeholders that have responsibilities related to those of WTO to restore trust. These are quite amazing statements for a trade agenda, word for word. And then explicit recognition of global governance challenge, climate change, natural disaster, biodiversity, etc., etc. And also new economic and social and environmental dimension of the social development goal. I'm opening a parenthesis. We have heard that the United States doesn't like this business of sustainable development. And they've been going to international organizations and say, we don't want you to refer to these SDG of the UN. WTO said, sorry, it's in our treaty, in the preamble, so there's no way we can stop talking about it. But what is new is that, contrary to the last 50 years, social is now mentioned, because COVID made everybody realize the importance, but this carries also all the debate about trade and labor. Another, just an example of a joint statement, again, because of the food issue during COVID, by all these IGOs, referring explicitly to the need to enhance the role of the private sector. Never did we see this before. And then the same situation triggered a call for work for small economies and gender issue, as I said, as part of the everyday work of the WTO, including attracting investment. This is taking so much time of the WTO, this investment role in the context of natural disasters and others. And this battle continued. The next, the 2024 ministerial, refers again to the same problem, including supply chain, but including the sustainable development goal and repeating its three dimensions: economic, social, and environmental. Now, this also, the pandemic that has disorganized everything, has brought a lot of call for change. But because of the traditional consensus to which Singapore suggested a new approach of responsible consensus in their proposal, a new set of changes started, and funny enough, it was proposed by China and US independently during the same week. And it was called Reform by Doing. Forget the law, just do it differently. We will codify or legislate on this eventually. So these are just reform. New areas are starting in subgroup, because India and others say, oh, no, I don't want to talk about child labor, I don't want to talk about e-commerce, I don't want to talk about climate. Forget it, says a group. We will talk about e-commerce. How can we not talk about digital trade today? And this was initiated by 3 countries, Japan, Australia, and Singapore. And I put here your ambassador from Singapore. I think he's the most outstanding man in those negotiations, trying, because he's sort of a developing country, not fully, but sort of. And he would crack the whip on developing countries, sit with developed countries, go left and right and focus on the substance and keep the line. Let's work on the substance. Let's try to find solution. We will try to find a way to integrate that in the WTO system when we have finally a good deal. This was done for domestic regulation and investment facilitation. This one is finalized and completed. The investment is still stuck. You have 135 countries who have signed a document that is close to a treaty. India says no. There's still consensus, and now they're exploring how to do it. How to do it when one out of all is explicitly saying no. But the work on the substance continues. Environment. This is where it's also extraordinary. Some countries, like Europe, very strong on environment. Others says, listen, we have other problems. We don't care about the environment. Or it should be discussed in the Environment IGO or in UNFCCC, not here. But we all know that one reaction possible when there's an environmental problem, it's that one importing country will say, if I receive your products and they're dirty or they affect climate, I will put at the border a duty. So this becomes a trade issue. But it was blocked everywhere, in each committee, each time EU wanted to talk, no, 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 no. I was involved in that because the EU started talking about CBAM everywhere. In the corridors, in the cafeteria, organizing conferences, inviting people. This was all informal. And you will see it has led to the COP inviting the WTO. But in the meantime, some group, and this was the first one, this is led by Canada and Costa Rica, some sort of informal groups got together and said, okay, let's not negotiate a treaty maybe, but let's do substantive work to understand the link between climate and those reactions between subsidies, which are the good subsidies, which are the bad, between circular economy, etc. So 4 working group, 78 members, inviting private sector, academic. It's a different, I don't want to say it's an academic sort of a debate, but it's a debate on substance to understand, and the idea was that this was going to be transferred to the formal negotiation group eventually. Same thing in plastic. So plastic, it's funny because there is a UN treaty being negotiated. Why would you bring things to the WTO? Well, some countries, Australia, Barbados, China, Ecuador, Fiji, Morocco, said it's important that the trade dimension is really taken on board by the UN negotiators. So let's make sure we review that and we make comments. So this is what was done. And they started initially 14, they're now 82. I'm talking about dispute settlement also because in 2019, the appellate body, we had an outstanding, I always say the dispute settlement system of the WTO is a miracle. It was a miracle. But unfortunately, in the area of trade remedies, the US lost all the time. Not in all areas, not in environment, not in agriculture, but a lot in trade remedies, over 29 disputes. So they said, finish, I don't want that, and I'm not paying. Creativity, I'm telling you, this is about the new role, the new activities of international organization. Well, this was more done by government, but in the WTO. They found out, they pointed to an old provision, Article 25 of the DSU, that says government can always, instead of using the standard system, use arbitration. So there's a student in her master paper who suggested, why don't they use this Article 25 on arbitration and make it an appeal? She got an internship in a big law firm who put this in a conference. The EU saw that, oh, good idea. And it works. So the students here, some of you, or anyone who writes, this is why it's important to write and publish, because ideas come out. I'm talking about that because one of the great judges of this new system, which we call the MPIA, is here in the room. It's lovely. He was a trade expert, and the governments, so I think it's about 60 of them, if you count each year, sit together and they pick 10 judges. And this group, the MPI, is like an appeal, and it follows more or less the rules of the appellate body, except that in the corridors, we're not supposed to say that, people whisper that they're better than the appellate body because they're real sort of trade experts. While the other judges, at least some of them, were high-flying people in their country, but maybe not top trade expert. So this is a beautiful example of creativity and being necessary. This did not resolve all the dispute settlement problems, but another approach that was used is that here a diplomat, who was not an ambassador, number two, was asked to form negotiations based on what is called interest. And they did for a year a long process of very informal. You could not have anything more informal. There were no minutes. Secretariat were prohibited from being in the room. It was just the government, and not only just the government, just expert. They did not want sort of diplomacy. They wanted solutions, and this took place this way. Then this process that led to a big report was transferred to a formal process under the ambassador of Mauritius, another outstanding woman, trying to take this big package and integrate it into the normal sort of corridors of the WTO, the normal track. Not easy, because India and maybe 2 or 3 friends kept saying, oh, no, this is not formal. We don't recognize this. But in practice, it was recognized. And I will end my talk, I have 2 parts, on the new role of the WTO, and I alluded to it in climate and COP, finance, and everything, at the big surprise. When I started 30 years ago, one day I was asked, I did training, among other things, to give a presentation to a group of labor, business people rather, in the WTO. Businessmen in Pakistan, Egypt, and other countries that brought. So I go on, I give my little talk. One man asked me a question, oh, the US says they will block our trade because we have child labor. So I explained, yes, they can say that, but there are counter-arguments. They must be coherent. Are they doing it with all countries in the same situation? Finish my talk, go to my office, an hour after, from the DG's office, I have a call. What did you talk about? What did you talk about? There's a complaint that you do trade labor. I explained. So Egypt and India blocked all meetings for 2 days and request an investigation. I was starting my job. God, I'm going to get fired. And then it was decided after 2 days that if we talk about those trade and environment, trade and labor, trade and human rights, we must call it trade and other issues. Don't say the bad words. Okay, things have evolved since. Things that have evolved, and this is the evidence, and you will see that's why I pointed to the sustainable development in its social dimension, because it's true. So, climate. DG and GOZI is convinced that we need to deal with climate. There's even a meeting in the Trade and Environment Committee, and some strong members call her and say, who the hell gave you the mandate to talk about that? She responds, I'm the DG of international trade. There is no trade if we don't deal with climate. And I hope it's the last time I receive this question. Apparently, all the delegates, who's this woman? She organized, apparently at the request of the World Steel Association, a big meeting. I was in the room, it was extraordinary. People from developing countries, the steel sector, from everywhere, and they are those who said this debate of climate must take place in the WTO, not only, but including, in particular, because some of the basic principles are fundamental, but in particular because developing countries trust the WTO, and they don't necessarily trust IMF, World Bank, and others. But also because of the principles of equivalence and mutual recognition across the board, which are so important in climate. Because one country will say, I do something good for climate, but it's not done the way you do, etc. So this started a new moment where even the DG and group of economists produced a price for carbon, something UNFCCC has not been able to agree upon. And of course, I don't have to tell you, EU is not so happy because their measure, their CBAM, imposes in a way a price on others. But she came and she also initiated an IGO carbon pricing task force with all the relevant IGO. And you will see that early on, yes, this is also an action involving private sector and certain IGO, but you will see that because of this de facto talking about climate everywhere in the corridor, and then people get invited, and then I wonder, how come? How come WTO talks about climate? Sustainable development. Well, UNFCCC, COP28, fed up of having WTO doing trade, and they refused, not the Secretariat, but some members in COP refused talking about trade. They said, let's invite the WTO at COP28. So the DG and a group of people, colleagues went, and arrived, for instance, as example, with the sales principles. And they created, as mentioned at the bottom, this task force for dealing with trade and climate. OECD, IMF, World Bank, UNFCCC were involved. We are so far away from the first days. Producing even a report that everybody's good, it's a beginning, but the whole of the sort of a research division worked on that. And the same movement went even to COP16 and the Convention on Biodiversity, where for the first time, WTO started getting invited essentially because actions on climate or penalty or reactions of government can be in the form of trade actions. Now, just an example, quite interesting, of China, who said, let's forget dispute. And at the same time, dispute become less. Let's forget dispute. Let's have thematic sessions on those issues. Some people started saying, wow, you should have that at UNFCCC. Yeah, but they don't want to have them. Okay, let's have them here then. But also, as I said, China, and then you have a US proposal that is quite interesting on regulatory cooperation at the time. I'm not sure they would still agree with that now, but my point is that the WTO moved from a court only or a lot in negotiation to a real forum of governance and trying to find solution. And new things also, funds. WTO never had any money, it still doesn't have much. But they created small funds now to help developing countries deal with all this new work that is part of the trade and more funds, including fishery subsidies. Another thing that is very close to sustainable development. You have now an agreement that tells you this list of subsidies for fish kills sustainable development. They become prohibited subsidies. Why is it done in the WTO? It was initiated in the UN, but the UN asked the WTO, would you help us with this negotiation of subsidies? We are good at sort of fish and sustainable development, these regulatory issues, but the subsidy kit, no. I have to say the subsidies on fishery are still ongoing. Only half of the deal was made, but a solution was found. The last point is artificial intelligence. I mentioned that your ambassador is doing, in my view, an outstanding job on e-commerce. But now it must be 4 years ago, EU notifies the WTO with all its artificial intelligence regulation. DG. I said, what's this? We don't have staff, 600 people. We don't have experts. Build your own international organization on artificial intelligence. No, no, no. This is like environment artificial intelligence, because depending on what is used in terms of solution artificial intelligence sort of formula, two goods that look alike may not be like, because you know that from the WTO, the issue of trade and environment can be resumed into my little sort of example. Imagine this is a bottle of water imported, this is domestically produced, there's a border here between the two. And the basic rule is that to the extent that this product and this product are like product for consumers, that is, they're similar, they must be taxed the same way, regulated the same way, everything, they're like. Now, if this is done in violation of the environment or Paris, but of course it doesn't show, because it depends on the effect on the climate. If these two products look similar, but they may not be according to NGOs and others, how do you treat them? And this goes for all the trade and. This is made by children 6 years old, not paid. This is made by a machine. Are they like? Because if they are like, you must regulate and treat them the same way. So traditionally, the WTO always said, well, of course they're like. Where do you see the difference? No difference. The change brought by the 30 years of the WTO case law is that the appellate body introduced the right to invoke exceptions, measures to protect the environment, to protect the morality, to protect health, to distinguish goods that could appear to be like. I tell you all that because this is all in parallel. For Europeans, artificial intelligence affects the way things are made and should be dealt in the WTO because there is no other forum. They notified a body in the WTO called TBT, that is Technical Barriers to Trade. A body, a committee of governments sit and talk about problems invented in the 70s before WTO about plug. If you produce toasters as a company and you export in this country and they have a plug with three heads, and then toasters in this other country and they have 4 heads, and this one has 3. So they sat together and they said we should harmonize our technical standard. So EU said that's the same. So everybody said that's the same, that's not really the same. No way, you're an international organization, you do what we tell you. So last year in 2023, I think, and then 4, and then in 25, it became the main report of the WTO. How do you connect AI and trade? So I will end with this image, this book, that I did during my 5 years in research, and I called International Organization Initiatives, basically arguing that international organization created by governments really did a great job in responding to new needs. So I gave you a few, but I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. In the late 80s, the World Bank gives money, loans, and the boss of the World Bank realized, well, we should really look at the environmental impact, but we have no environmental expert. So they hire, I think it's in 88, 83 economists with environment expert, and tell the staff, you must take into account environment when you evaluate loans, etc. So they sort of change things. So there are many examples. We found 70 of them and organized a little conference where they all came to explain their sort of initiative. Of course, governments have to approve. It's one thing to have an idea to put it forward, but if the states don't agree, it won't work. But the point is that governments created organizations to help them collaborate, and my message, using just WTO as an example, is that this is a success. Most organizations have been able to respond to the needs that are new to members. I conclude, this gave a bit of a heart attack to some members because the DG sort of said the Secretariat has its own strategy. Oh my God. So I won't comment longer, but she issued this document myself. I thought, oh, this is nothing compared to my little trade in labor. And then I just listed new areas of work that have nothing to do with the initial mandate. But because you have, with everything, because of digitalization, but also because of pollution, everything goes from country A to country B to country C. All solutions require involvement of 1, 2, 3 country. Then this is trade. So this is, sometimes I hear, oh, WTO will disappear. Come, Geneva, check the parking. And when the US cut fundings, there's one organization that was not cut. It's a small thing. It's WTO, not because it's so essential, but because governments need a forum where to sit and talk about those trans-border issues, and there are many, many of them. So this was the goal of my presentation today.